Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep going in Series 4 of the TTT, getting Week 28 underway with another Mailbag Monday. Now, Christopher B. writes in from Norway, enjoy your 3 hours of sunlight today, asking if I think the Norse Jarl and legendary bowman Einar Thambarskelfir was an inspiration for the name Túrin Túrinbar. Personally, Christopher says, the heroic surname is so similar, I can't forget about it. That is an interesting question, Christopher. Now, before I dive in, folks, this story does involve Túrin Túrinbar, so it's going to involve some dark stuff. For those of you not familiar with the story, there are some pretty heavy themes. And so I will be discussing things like the incest that takes place unknowingly between Túrin and his sister, as well as the end of the lives of both Túrin and his sister, both of whom died by suicide. And because of that, I wanted to provide a content warning. Of course, I'm not going to be offended if you choose to skip this episode. And please remember that if you are struggling with thoughts of suicide or self-harm, help is available. In the United States, just dial 988 like you would dial 911. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to know that information for every country that all of you are in, but the help is there, and I urge you to look that up if you are struggling with those thoughts. For the rest of you, please continue listening, and here we go. For those not familiar with Einar Thambarskelfir, and that included me right up until I researched him for this episode, let me bring you up to speed. He was an 11th century Norwegian noble and politician mentioned in the Heimskringla, an Old Norse king's saga written by the Icelandic historian and poet Snorri Sturluson, the man behind the prose Edda. Now, given Tolkien's love of Old Norse, Icelandic, and the Edda, it's not an unreasonable question to ask. But there aren't a lot of similarities between the story of Thambarskelfir and the story of Túrin Túrinbar. Snorri's saga says that Einar was one of the sharpest bow shooters, and he was a valiant fighter. Okay. He opposed Olaf Haraldsson's reign and fought against him in 1016, then supported Danish influences to overthrow him in 1028. He was great at political maneuverings, becoming the power behind the throne in Norway before being assassinated by Olaf's half-brother Harald Sigurdsson, or Harald Hardrada, meaning harsh ruler, in 1050. Now, given all that, let's go back to Tolkien. Tolkien himself had no problem acknowledging the inspirations for Túrin, explaining in letter number 131 that the tragic tale of Túrin Túrinbar and his sister Niniel, of which Túrin is the hero, a figure that might be said, by people who like that sort of thing, though it is not very useful, to be derived from elements in Sigurd the Volsung, Oedipus, and the Finnish Kullervo. And in Carpenter's biography, we read, at about this time, perhaps while he was lying in hospital in Hull, Tolkien composed another major story for the Book of Lost Tales. This was the tale of the hapless Túrin, which was eventually given the title The Children of Húrin. Again, one may detect certain literary influences. The hero's fight with a great dragon inevitably suggests comparison with the deeds of Sigurd and Beowulf, while his unknowing incest with his sister and his subsequent suicide were derived quite consciously from the story of Kullervo in the Kalevala. But again, these influences are only superficial. The Children of Húrin is a powerful fusion of Icelandic and Finnish traditions." End quote. Now, each of the stories mentioned, Sigurd, Oedipus, and Kullervo, have elements that clearly connect to Túrin. Sigurd uses a reforged, broken heirloom sword to kill a dragon by stabbing him from underneath. Oedipus unwittingly fulfills a prophecy and unknowingly commits incest with his mother. Kullervo is, well, even more of a direct inspiration, it seems. Not only does he unwittingly commit incest with his sister, but she takes her own life when she discovers Kullervo is her brother. He talks to his sword, which speaks back to him just as Gurthang speaks to Túrin before he commits suicide as well. Túrin doesn't display any real similarities to Thambarskelfir. But to be fair, Christopher appears to have been asking about the similarities of the actual name, not just the idea that the character of Thambarskelfir was an inspiration for Túrin. So we're looking at the name Thambarskelfir, and boy, if I've mispronounced it, I'm going to hear it because I'm having to say it 100 times, and the name Túrinbar. Now, there is some auditory similarity, especially when we eliminate the last two syllables of Thambarskelfir's name. We're left with Thambar, which isn't too far off of Túrinbar. But given the complex and thorough way that Tolkien developed his languages, I'm going to have to say almost certainly not. Túrinbar is Quenya for Master of Doom. It's made up of the elements Túr, meaning master or lord, and Ambar, meaning doom. Now, we do see the Túr element in at least one other name, Elros Tarminjatur, with Tarminjatur meaning High First Lord or Ruler. And Ambar is spotted in a few other places. The father name of Finarfin's son Eignor, that's the brother of Finrod and Galadriel, was Ambarato, meaning Champion of Doom. Its Sindarin cognate is Amarth, which we all know from Amon Amarth, Mount Doom. Now, if Quenya had had its phonetic inspiration in Icelandic, maybe we'd have something to connect it to Thambarskelfir's name. But Quenya's phonology, and much of its grammar as well, are most strongly influenced by Finnish, which is not related at all to Icelandic or any of the other Norse and Germanic languages. I'd have to say that this is simply a phonetic coincidence, much like Tyrion upon Túna, not related to the English name for the fish, and Celeborn's old name, Teleporno, not being related at all to, well, what it sounds like, thankfully. Well, folks, that wraps it up for Mailbag Monday. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, please email it to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Let me know it's for today's Tolkien Times, and I'll get to it as soon as possible, with priority going to supporters of the show on Patreon. Speaking of which, please visit patreon.com/Tolkien Times to find out how you can help the show, get an ad-free feed, listen to an extra episode every week, and a lot more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we open up the revised and extended edition of Letters. If you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.